Welcome to UFO Man Live. My name is Tim, or UFO Man, and to my side is my co-host, my friend, Tommy Highway. Tommy?
Hey, folks, I'm Tommy Highway. I want to thank everybody for coming out as always. Folks, we have a fantastic show for you this evening. We were actually fortunate enough to get an interview with Kathleen Marden, and she is none other than the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. And as we all know, that is a very famous story in ufology. So we were actually able, she was kind enough to grant us an interview. We sat down with her, asked her a lot of questions I'm sure you're going to really love. And you have to understand, she's a family member, a close family member. So she shared their experience in a way. And it was just very fascinating. I was blown away. Tim and I both learned things that we didn't know before about the case, which, you know, that's really saying something, you know, talk coming from us. That being said, and not only did we have Kathleen, but we were even lucky enough to get Terry Lovelace to drop by, and he sat in on it with us and asked some questions, and everyone knows we love that guy. So absolutely, folks, sit down with us, enjoy this. You're going to love it. And as an added bonus, at the end of the interview, we have a fantastic UFO review to show you. So we'll go through that. We'll all examine that together, talk about it. And Tim, we can go ahead and start the interview whenever you like.
Special guest by the name of Kathleen Marden. She is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill and the foremost authority on the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction. To my side is my friend and my co-host, Tommy Highway. Tommy?
Hello, folks. I'm Tommy Highway. I want to thank everybody for coming. We're very, very fortunate to have Kathleen with us. Again, like to Tim's point, she's an expert on the Betty and Barney Hill story. That's one that everyone's heard of. And we also are very fortunate tonight, folks, to actually have with us our dear friend of ours, Mr. Terry Lovelace. Terry?
Yes.
Thanks very much, guys. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's nice to see Kathleen again, and I can't wait to hear the discussion. I'm sure it'll be great.
Nice to see you too.
Okay, Tommy. Tommy, you said you had the first question.
Kathleen, again, thank you for being here. It is just an honor, a pleasure. I'm so very familiar with your work, with you personally, with a lot of your speeches out there. I just think you're fantastic. I tell you, I feel like I'm, you know, I feel like I'm at the feet of greatness here, really. Honestly, you're just such a hero. I guess the big question is, most people out there in ufology are very familiar with your aunt and uncle's story and what happened to them, their experience. But we were hoping that maybe you could, sort of in your own words as you know it, could you kind of remind us of the story, please?
Sure. I'll do that briefly. Betty and Barney were my aunt and uncle. In August of 1961, I had been out to Niagara Falls. We lived in New Hampshire, and I had photographs from that trip, and I was telling my aunt and uncle, Betty and Barney, who visited my childhood home just about every weekend. I was showing them the photographs and telling them about what a wonderful time we had. And Barney turned to Betty and said, "Have you ever been to Niagara Falls?" And Betty said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "Well, do you think you'd like to go sometime?" And she said that she would like to go. So he decided to surprise her with this trip. During her week off, she had a vacation from her job as a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. She worked in child welfare and adoption, and later was promoted to a supervisor. And so Barney worked for the post office, and he took a few days off and did surprise Betty with this trip. They had a wonderful time, vacationed in Niagara Falls, and then up through Ontario. They stopped in Montreal. This is over a number of days, and vacationed there, saw the city. But as they were looking for a motel to stop at for the night, Barney got lost, and he ended up on the road that would take them back home. So he was headed toward Vermont and then through upstate Vermont over into upstate New Hampshire. They lived down on the seacoast. And they of course, stopped and gassed the car up and those kinds of things. They stopped for a snack. They had left Colebrook at 10 o'clock at night and rewound their watches to make sure that their time was accurate. They were going to watch to see if they arrived home when they thought they would, which would be about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, it was a bright, light night. The moon was about 3/4 full. And as they're driving along, Betty saw a new light, but it flew upward into the sky in kind of an arcing motion. And she was wondering what it was. She was watching it. It was coming in closer and closer. She asked Barney to stop the car so they could get a look at it. They did get out and looked at it, and it was unusual. It was not traveling in a straight line or even circling the way a plane would. It would move straight out and then it would come straight back. And it was completely silent. And this was very unusual. Barney and Betty had never seen anything like this, but Barney was a confirmed skeptic, and he enjoyed giving Betty a hard time just for chuckles. And so he was saying, "Oh, Betty, just forget it about it. It's a plane, Piper Cub, or a plane on its way up to Montreal. Just, it's nothing unusual." And so they got back into the car. They headed into Franconia Notch. If you're not familiar with Franconia Notch, it's a beautiful area of New Hampshire. The valley is wide, and then it becomes narrow. And there is a pretty little river that runs down on one side, and the mountains come up on both sides. The Cannon Mountain ski area is there, and the Old Man of the Mountain Memorial is there now. It used to be, when I lived in New Hampshire, our state symbol, but it fell off the mountain, unfortunately, in 2003. So now there's just a memorial there for it. But back in 1961, Betty and Barney were able to stop the car and get out and take a look, because this craft was now hovering right next to the old man's profile, which is 48 feet from forehead to chin. And they noticed that it was at least 1.5, maybe 2 times the length of the old man's profile. It was moving after that erratically, zigzagging about, doing a stair-step pattern up and down and up and down. And they got back into the car, and Barney said, "Well, I want to get home at a decent hour. I don't want to spend a lot of time with this." So they got back into the car and they were driving south. They exited the south exit of Franconia Notch and had driven about 1 mile when suddenly this craft swooped down over the highway and stopped only about 200 feet above their vehicle. In fact, Barney had to pull the car to the middle of the road so that he wouldn't be directly underneath it. And I have done many UFO abduction investigations where people have tried to drive underneath that craft, and they never make it to the other side. They're always swooped up into that craft. So it's a good thing that Barney stopped where he did. He got out of the car, left the motor running. He's looking up at the craft, and as he stepped back from the car, it moved to an adjacent field to the east, and it descended even lower. It was now about 100 feet above him, and he was standing there at the edge of the field with the binoculars, shaking his head, saying, "It can't be, but it is." And he looked up at this craft that he described as looking like a giant pancake with bright lights behind a row of windows. And standing in those windows were figures dressed in black, shiny uniforms. And all of a sudden, all but one moved to what appeared to be some kind of panel. Their arms went up, and he could now see them from the tops of their heads down to their knees. And when this happened, the little red lights that were on the craft, there were two of them, started to slide out on little fin-like structures. And something started to drop down out of the bottom of the craft. That's the carrier beam. Barney didn't know what it was. Dr. Simon said, "What do you think it is? You think it's a ladder?" And Barney didn't know. "Think it's a rope?" "Well, I don't know." He said, "I think it looked something like a rope." Well, that's what that beam looks like when it comes down. So at that point, Barney thought that he was going to be captured. He became hysterical, tearing the binoculars away from his eyes, and ran back to the car, screaming to Patty that they had to get out of there or they were going to be captured. And he went speeding down the highway, but he had noticed that that craft was heading back in his direction. And within a few moments, he heard, and Betty heard too, a series of code-like buzzing sounds striking the trunk of their car. It caused the car to vibrate and for kind of an electrical tingling sensation to pass through their bodies. In fact, Betty felt the metal on the car to see if she would get an electric shock from it, but she didn't. So the next thing they knew, they were 35 miles down the highway with very little memory of what had happened in the interim. They remembered finding themselves on a dirt road with tall trees all around. They remembered a roadblock, and they remembered what appeared to be a large fiery orb that might have been sitting on the ground, but they didn't know where or when that occurred. And Betty said to Barney, "Well, Barney, now do you believe in flying saucers?" And he said, "Of course I don't, Betty. Don't be ridiculous." And he said, "I can make that sound myself," because they heard another series of buzzing sounds at about that time. And he tried to reproduce that sound. He stopped the car. He drove from one side of the road to the other, did everything he could. He could not make that sound with the car. So they just drove home. And when they arrived home, they realized that it was much later than they had anticipated arriving. And not only that, there were mysteries. Tops of his best dress shoes were so deeply scraped, he had to buy new shoes. The watches they'd been wearing that were working at 10 o'clock that night, when they rewound them, had stopped and never ran again. There were shiny spots on the trunk of the vehicle of their car that made a compass needle spin and spin, indicating a magnetic field. And also, Betty's dress was torn in several places. So they had great difficulty with this problem. What happened? What happened to us? They felt dirty. They more so than they would have just from sitting in the car and being on vacation. They both took long showers and they sat down and sketched what they saw. And when they did this, they were in separate rooms, so they couldn't compare notes. Barney sketched what he saw, which actually did show those entities standing behind the windows in the craft. Betty had remained in the car, so she didn't see the entities. And so she drew what was the same kind of craft, but the way she saw it, and she didn't see what Barney saw. So this really bothered Barney terribly. He ended up over time developing bleeding ulcers. He was hospitalized. He developed high blood pressure. He had to take a 3-month leave of absence from work. This was troubling him so badly. And Betty really wasn't that troubled by it. She did have some working through to do, but she was more curious than anything. She went to the library. She took the first book she had ever read on that book, on UFOs, out of the library. And there was an address in it for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. So they made a report to NICAP, which brought out a NICAP investigator, Walter Webb. He was a scientist. He was an astronomer who worked at the Hayden Planetarium in Boston. And he went out and interviewed them. I don't know what that noise is. Interviewed them over a period of about 6 hours separately and together. And they also made a report to Pease Air Force Base. My father's best friend had been the chief of police in the little town of Newton, New Hampshire. And he advised them that Pease had asked the police stations to advise people to make a report if they had UFO sightings. And there had been a lot in that area. So being good citizens, they did that. And eventually, Barney, because of the psychogenically induced physiological problems that he was experiencing, was referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon. Dr. Simon was a neuropsychiatrist who had developed a special hypnotic technique. And it got to the crux of the problem, to help individuals to overcome these psychogenically induced physiological symptoms. He had worked very successfully with soldiers coming back terribly bruised psychologically after World War II, and had, for example, were unable to see, even though there was only a psychological problem for that, unable to walk, psychologically induced. And the movie, Let There Be Light, was made about his work. So he was the head of the American Psychiatric Association for a while. He was in the Army during World War II, lieutenant colonel, received many commendations and medals, and was at the top of his field. He was in Who's Who in America. And he was very smart in the way he worked with Betty and Barney, because he hypnotized them separately, and he reinstated amnesia at the end of each session so that they wouldn't contaminate one another's information. He saw them for hypnosis for about 3 to 4 months. And then he saw them together because he asked them if they would like to be able to remember what happened and would they like to listen to their hypnosis tapes together. And so he worked with them. They wanted to do this and worked through it. So I have to thank Dr. Simon for the work that he did with Barney. He did a tremendous job. After that, Barney went on with his civil rights activities. And in fact, in 1965, because of his political activities, he and Betty were invited to Lyndon Johnson's inauguration. And I received an invitation too as a teenager and went with them. It was one of the most wonderful experiences of my entire life. Barney was also given an award from Sergeant Shriver, who was the head of the Federal Poverty Program, for the work he had done with Betty and other people setting up the Rockingham County Community Action Program to help low-income people in Rockingham County. He received a commendation from the Archdiocese of Manchester, New Hampshire, for setting up a literacy program so that people could become literate and be able to vote in New Hampshire. And also, the big one was that he was appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights as the State Advisory Committee member in the state of New Hampshire. They never wanted their story to be made public. They were willing to talk to scientists, to UFO investigators, to the Couples Club and the minister at their church, they were Universalist Unitarians. And they told the family, but we were sworn to secrecy. They told good friends who were not supposed to tell anyone too. But it did manage to slip out through a friend of Betty's. And she talked to a reporter from the Boston Traveler. He contacted Betty and Barney and said, if you will meet with me, I promise that I will not commercialize your story in any way. It's only for my own interest. And they said no, they were not going to meet with him. They didn't meet with him. Yet Betty's friend and a lot of other people talked to him. Officers at Pease Air Force Base talked to him, and even witnesses to that UFO in upstate New Hampshire spoke with him. And so the cat was out of the bag in October of that year. The last week in October, it ran for 5 days in the Boston Traveler. Betty and Barney were very distressed. It was sort of destroyed Barney's civil rights and political activities in a way, which was very unfortunate. He remained committed to it, but he was appointed to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission for 1 year, and he was not reappointed, even though he was a great speaker, very committed to this work that he was doing. And so it really had a bigger impact all the way through. It had a bigger impact on Barney than it did on Betty. And it was unfortunate. We met as a family. That's why I know he was so distressed. And we decided what they should do. This affected all of us. It had an impact on the entire family. And so we talked about it, and we finally decided that they should talk about the sighting that they had, that close encounter, but not about the abduction. So within a few days, they did speak at the Unitarian Church in Dover, New Hampshire, and were introduced by the public information officer from Pease Air Force Base. Many military officers and friends of theirs were there. Also, members of the public. The church was packed full of people. There were people standing outside in the sleet, wanting to get in. So Betty and Barney were very surprised that they didn't receive the criticism they thought they would receive. And so they finally decided to allow John Fuller to write a book about them. He was a professional writer, a journalist, and he had written articles for Look magazine. One of his articles was on the Condon Committee's sham, and also other articles he wrote for the Saturday Review and other things. So he was a very good writer. And he wrote that first book, and it was based pretty much on the statements that Betty and Barney made under hypnosis. It wasn't all 10 hours of the tapes. He kind of chopped it up here and there. And so that was in the book. It became a New York Times bestseller. It was published in many different languages. But then in about 30 years ago, I decided to investigate the case myself as thoroughly as I possibly could. I transcribed those hypnosis tapes, and I was not a good typist at that time, but so it took me a very long time to type out 10 hours of tapes. But I used them for comparative analysis because Dr. Simon had hypothesized that perhaps 5 dreams that Betty had had and had written down might have had an impact on her and on Barney too. So he wondered if Barney and Betty were only reliving Betty's dreams. And so I wanted to compare their statements to find out, Did they relive Betty's dreams? Or is there evidence that is different from the information on Betty's dreams? Well, I found out there is information that's different, and it's all in my book with Stanton Friedman, Captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. And I'm very happy to say that the 60th anniversary edition, which I have updated with new scientific evidence, new information, has been released. So everything is in that book, all the juicy stuff.
Fantastic. Well, again, it's such a profound story, and there have been movies and constant articles and books and things like that written about their experience, because in a way, and to Terry's point backstage, they're sort of the nexus when it comes to UFO abduction stories. I mean, they're the ones that really, the story that really came out and really grabbed people and made people aware that, there's something strange happening to folks out there.
Yes, absolutely. They were the first scientifically investigated case of alien abduction in the United States. Of course, Antonio Vilas Boas in Brazil had an experience earlier, but we didn't know that in the United States. It hadn't been made public.
My wife cut that article out of Look magazine and kept it, and I think she still has it. That's
yeah.
Just
I have both of them.
Yeah.
And also the one about the Condon Committee.
Yes.
A very expensive mistake.
Yes, it was.
Mm-hmm.
Kathleen, can you discuss a little bit about Betty seeing the star map?
Yeah.
Well, yes, she had finished with her exam, and she began to trust the leader at this point. He had been reassuring her that she wouldn't be harmed. And so she said to him, I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port? And he produced this sort of three-dimensional star map out of the wall. And it had two stars, as you just saw, in the foreground, and then there were several other stars as well. That's her map, and it shows some of the stars connected by solid lines, and those are their trade ports. And then the other lines, the dotted lines, are expeditions. So this was very interesting to a brilliant woman from Ohio. Her name was Marjorie Fish, and she spent years going to the astronomy department in the library at the university and hand copying the distance data and the characteristics of all of the stars out 55 light years from our sun, attempting to find a match.
Incredible.
It is incredible. No computers. She was building frames and using monofilament line and beads of various sizes and colors to represent the stars in our local galactic neighborhood. And she had to do the math in order to know where to put every one of them. She built 14 models in all and still didn't have a match. But finally, a new catalog was released because we had advanced technologically. And so we were able to had a satellite that could now look into space. So we didn't have that atmospheric interference. And she used the new distance data, the new characteristics, and those stars that were missing previously were now on the map. So she had a match for Betty's star map. And this generated a lot of curiosity and interest from the scientific community. Stanton Friedman was called in to see if he would find scientists who would vet Marjorie's work. And he did. And the scientists who did the analysis said that Marjorie's work was accurate. So this was big news. But at the same time, there were skeptics and disinformants who were yelling loudly that you could throw marbles into a sand pit and you'd be able to find the stars. But you would not be able to find the stars that have the characteristics of the stars on Betty's map.
Didn't Stanton got that peer reviewed? You know, you would think that that would go a long way to establish the credibility of what she saw, because it's just amazing. And God bless that woman for the work she did.
Yes, and it did go a long way to establish the credibility of that with honest astronomers who were looking at that. But then there were those that are known as being disinformants. They call themselves skeptics, but they're intelligence enough to know fact from fiction, and they were cranking out fiction. So the honest astronomers said that it had very special properties, that all of the sun-like stars in our part of the local galactic neighborhood out 54 light years were on Betty's map, although only 5% of the stars in our galaxy were sun-like. So, I mean, the odds against that were astronomical.
It's a fingerprint.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
Very much
and
so.
Still, it's being questioned by people today. But
Of course.
you know, it's that they don't have the will to believe even the scientific evidence.
Sure.
Right. So what I wanted to say real quick about that star map is we had not even technologically discovered that area of space until later. So when she came up with it, that's what gave her the credibility when it was vetted.
Yes. And the star system in the foreground, those two stars, are the Zeta Reticuli star system, the net, Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. And that can be seen only from the southern hemisphere. And it's fairly dim, even from the southern hemisphere, I've been told. And Betty had not studied astronomy when she drew that. And, so there are many reasons to believe that she was able to identify.
Forgive me for asking, but did Betty live long enough to see that drawing validated?
Yes, she did. She did.
I'm so happy to hear that.
That's fantastic. Well, it's a smoking gun. I mean, this is a person that has absolutely no experience in astrology whatsoever.
Astronomy.
Astronomy, and all of that. And all of a sudden, this person draws this map, and we're able to validate it years later once we have the eyes in the sky, if you will, to be able to find those planets and draw and connect those dots. I mean, it's amazing.
Something else about those stars are that they are all in a plane, like pepperoni on a pizza, as opposed to raisins spread out in a loaf of raisin bread. So it means that there is a logical pattern from one star to the next star if you're traveling and exploring space.
Huh. I never knew that.
Outstanding. Well, to be honest with you, Kathleen, one of the things that is lacking in ufology and in sightings and encounters and all of that tends to be the lack of a lot of physical evidence. There's just not a whole lot of it out there. And the Betty and Barney Hill experience is unique in that we have a couple of actually different, we have several different forms of physical evidence. One of which is the dress itself and the pink powder that was contained on the dress. Now, I've always been very curious about this, and I'm sure that at some point that was analyzed, that there was a chemical analysis done on the powder. What can you tell us about that?
Yes, and that's all in the book. Too, that it has been analyzed by chemists in several different laboratories. Also, DNA analysis has been done on that dress as well. Some very interesting findings, and you'll read about it in Captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. And regarding evidence, I believe that this is the best evidence case in history. I have collected evidence from many experiencers. Some of it has been DNA tested with extraordinary results. Some of it is photographic evidence on their bodies. Some of it is a very powerful electromagnetic field or electrical field around their bodies shortly after they have been returned from being taken. So we have a lot of evidence, but there has been so much criticism in the past. So many people just don't want to have a lot of difficulty in their lives. So they will talk with other experiencers, of course. They will talk to people like me who investigates this sort of thing, but it's all confidential because they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their credibility. And I have to tell you that there are people from all walks of life around the world. People high up in the governments have had these experiences, all the way through highly educated people, people who are not as well educated. But it appears that these ETs in the beginning selected individuals. And because they were outside in a certain place, I've talked to a lot of kids who were like farm children who lived near large bodies of water and would be out on the backlands of the family farm and would be taken for the first time. Also, people who were fishing, hunting, camping, hiking, those sorts of things, driving the car like Betty and Barney. That happened a lot. And the ETs were looking for the type, the characteristics of the DNA that they were looking for. And when they found people with those characteristics, then they took the family line, the people who are genetically related to them. And it has been passed down through the generations, they say, so that they are able to see the progress that they are making to upgrade the human genome across generations.
Could I ask, in your experience, would you say that it's a rarity that a child would have a one-on experience? I mean, does that happen, or is it more often a lifetime of intermittent activity?
Well, generally, a child who would have an experience would have a parent who also has had the experience way back and today too. Now, they might have taken children alone, and they might have taken them only one time if they were not genetically appropriate for their studies. I know this has happened because I've talked to people who were taken, they believe, only one time, and they just didn't have the right DNA.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that my dad was taken, so, but that's the only family member I'm aware of. Maybe a sister, she's not sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that that really struck me about the Betty and Barney Hill story was the hypnosis tapes. And I remember, well, first off, this was a big deal in my house growing up. UFOs were a thing. We lived in the very neighborhood of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and believe me, the rumors flew about that. I remember growing up in grade school, and teachers would talk about the alien bodies and the Roswell crash debris and all of that, supposedly stored, at Wright-Pat. So it was a thing, But I remember as a child and listening to the tapes, and it's so spine chilling to listen to Barney's tapes. I mean, he's obviously in incredible distress. I just don't think that there's any way a person could make something like that up. And when you listen to those tapes, you're listening to a man that is obviously having some sort of an experience that his psyche's having a real hard time with. He's having physical responses to it. It's just, amazing. I mean, to me, that's another smoking gun, really.
Yes. He had so much difficulty, and he was well adjusted before this, except for he did suffer from some racial strife, just as any Black man in that time frame in America, being raised in a segregated state of Virginia would have. So, but yes, this had a profound impact on Barney. First, because he didn't believe it was possible, and second, because he felt that he was going to be abducted by these non-humans that were on this unconventional craft. And then he had the missing time, and then he had the scraped shoes, and then he had debris on his pant legs. There were so many things that were just playing in his mind. He wanted to forget about it. One of the statements that he made when he arrived home is, Betty, we have to forget about this. No good can ever come from telling anyone about this. But Betty was insistent. She was curious, just as I am. So she pursued it as far as she could to attempt to learn more about all of this.
So Betty was the driving force behind Barney coming out with the story then?
Well, Barney, of course, spoke to the Air Force, but he didn't want it made public. He was interviewed by Walter Webb and some other scientists confidentially. It was the newspaper reporter who took it to the public, not Betty. But then after that happened, the cat was out of the bag. So what do you do then?
Right.
They weren't liars. They weren't going to deny it. So they just decided to speak about it and were introduced by the public information officer at Pease Air Force Base. So it gave it some credibility.
Could I ask a question I've always wanted to ask you?
Yes.
Barney was a postal worker.
Yes.
And every postal worker I've ever known, because I've known a few, had some in the family, were just, really well oriented to north, south, east, and west, especially if they were especially if they delivered mail. And I've made that ride from Montpelier, Vermont, to Montreal many times. And that's a long, straight stretch of road between the Vermont border and when you get into Montreal. And I'm sure it was even less was there then. It's just mostly farmland on either side. And the fact that Barney got lost has always kind of puzzled me. Because I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just curious. Do you think that he was programmed to get lost? Do you think that he was there by appointment?
I don't know. I really don't know if it was just his time to be taken. He got lost when he was on the outskirts of Montreal, and all of the signs were in French, and he couldn't read French. And, that was the difficulty. It could have just been an accident that he got lost and he found himself on the road that would take him back to New Hampshire through upstate Vermont. And so he just said, well, why don't we just continue to drive on? And if I grow tired, then we'll stop for the night. There was a beautiful little resort community in Quebec that they stopped at in the late afternoon after they had been in Montreal vacationing. And they were just having a great time. I have a photograph taken of them at a little pasture or a little ring where there was a horse and people could pay to take the ride on the horse. They used to do that when I was a kid. I remember doing that frequently. And Betty was wearing that dress.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Yeah. So maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was not an accident. But I I do suspect that Betty, at least, had been taken previously, but just simply didn't remember it.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, in her story, when you listen to her regression therapy session, you know, she's talking a story like, okay, the aliens came in while she was in a room with one of the aliens, and they were all excited, and they wanted to know why Barney's teeth were removable. Now, how do you make that up? I mean, honestly, you know, I mean, that is something that it's so outrageous, but it lends credibility to the story because it's outrageous. I mean, and that's, you know what I mean, if that makes sense.
Yes, and you know, I compared Betty's statement to Barney's statement when I transcribed the hypnosis tapes, and Barney said, "Oh, I can feel something like a finger or a thumb being put into my mouth." So when they did that, they must have flipped his teeth out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just incredible.
Uh-huh. So tugging on Betty's teeth, do they come out too? And why not?
I guess let's talk about the description of these creatures. Now, I've watched Betty's interviewed many times. In fact, I believe I saw her final interview, and as she described these beings, they're not exactly the gray aliens that we're associated with. Or am I correct about that?
They are different. There are many different races of grays. They're not all the same. They were what you just saw were the taller ones. There were 2 taller ones there on the craft, and yeah, they were gray, and they have all the characteristics of that type of gray. But then there were the little ones that are the assistants and are the sort of the police force aboard the craft. They pick you up. They take you to the craft. They guard your door to make sure you don't escape. They won't let you off the craft with anything that belongs to them. That's their job. They stand there and they don't move unless they're told to.
Interesting.
So they're more like the ones that you think of as the stereotypic gray. You know, about 3.5, 4 feet tall. They were on the craft with Betty and Barney. They didn't make it public.
Okay, I see.
They did that on purpose because one of the scientists asked them not to mention that part of it in order to determine if other people had seen the 2 different types of grays too.
There have been reports of people seeing many different types of grays, talls, medium-sized, and short.
Yes.
And the short ones have always been referred to as kind of robotic or drone-like, like they've been taking orders from someone higher up.
Manufactured.
And that when some people are abducted and laying on the table, they've reported seeing a very tall gray approaching the table, and they almost refer to him as a doctor.
Yeah, well, for the small ones, a lot of people do believe that they are biorobotic or robotic, and because they only move when instructed to do so, because they do the menial labor, and it would make sense. You know, you don't have to feed them. You don't have to give them a place to sleep, that sort of thing. So it would be more efficient, I imagine. You don't have to worry about them having disagreements with one another. Who knows? But, that I've thought about that. And then the very tall ones, some people talk about tall grays, but a lot of people think of the insectoid type as being the taller one, and they are much more frequently work with the 2 other types of grays.
Are you referring to the mantis?
Yes, I am.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. That's been reported quite often, actually, the mantis beings. And I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they're quite benign in nature, the mantis.
Well, most people do say that, but for people who are unfamiliar with this, when they are having their first experiences,
Right.
they're terrified. They communicate differently than humans do, and they do things that sometimes terrify people. You know, they try to tell people that the soul is encased in a container. You know, your body is a container for the soul. But the way they will do that would be like, you know, they're eating off somebody's, the person thinks they're having an arm eaten off or a head eaten off or something. It's just terrifying to people who have those kinds of experiences. But the message they're attempting to impart is different. So, you know, when people have hypnosis and they're remembering this, then they feel terrified and that this horrific thing has happened to them, until they can actually come to the point where they understand that that didn't really happen. It was just a way of communicating and an indication that they really seem not to understand humans very well.
I got a distinct medical vibe from my brief encounter, and they hurt me, but I didn't think it was malicious. I didn't think it was a torture session. It had some type of, like I say, a medical vibe to it. So.
Yes, yeah. And it's unfortunate that they have that escort there who takes away the pain after you experience it, instead of removing it before, so that you don't experience that pain. And I'm trying to get experiencers, when they're in communication with these non-humans, to tell them this, you know, that
I was screaming as loud as I could scream. And I think I annoyed them. And finally, I don't know why, like you said, why they didn't do this in the beginning. The guy reached over and tapped me on top of the head, and I was out.
Yeah, they could do that in advance. Why don't they? And so, you know, everybody who's listening, if you have communication and contact with these entities, please send them these telepathic messages. And also, if you're on craft, send them these telepathic messages. That's the way they communicate. Learn to communicate telepathically.
Yes.
Perhaps the reaction of the human specimen is part of their scientific research. Maybe that's why they're not doing that. Maybe they're testing our reaction to certain stimuli like pain or fear, and I've read a lot of times where they'll show folks mental images of all kinds of different animals and things of that nature, and maybe that's part of it. Who knows?
Possibly. I don't know. And generally in the physical examination, that's not part of it, but then it's in the learning period after the physical examination where people might be shown their dog that is now deceased, and they'd be really happy to see that dog, or images of a barren planet, or a planet that's covered with water, or waves washing over the land, or nuclear destruction. They're very concerned about nuclear destruction.
The thought is that we're wondering sometimes in the ufology community in regards to nuclear observation by these ETs as to whether they're looking to protect us, the human species, or whether they're trying to protect us and themselves because they may or may not have existing bases here.
Well, what they told Admiral Herbert Knowles and Rear Admiral Herbert Knowles and Wilbert Smith from the Canadian government back in 1954. And the reason I have this information is that I was attempting to get the communication files for Frances Swan, who was a woman who was having telepathic communication with the ETs. And the information she received was advanced scientific information. The letter went to Dwight Eisenhower. It went to Margaret Chase Smith, who was the senator from Maine. It then went out to the Office of Naval Intelligence, the CIA, the FBI, the Air Force. And I was able to acquire those correspondence files, which were very, very interesting. And I'm not going to tell you all of it because I'm writing a book on it right now. But in those correspondence files, they had written about the ETs saying that our use of nuclear weapons causes damage. First, it causes the collapsing of the magnetic fault lines on our planet. And when this happens, then the nuclear radiation, whatever, bleeds in through the veil or in through the brain between dimensions. And it causes destruction in other dimensions too. And that was the message that they were, the primary message they were carrying to humans. Please stop harming us.
That was the message that Betty gave me, was it causes interdimensional bleeds. I think you and I had that discussion or talk about that.
Yes, I think we did.
So in regards to harming us, does that indicate that they may be coming from a different dimension?
To me, it indicates they're coming from a different dimension. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a dimension on our planet, but it could be a different dimension from space as well. My Aunt Betty Hill was shown a star map,
right,
when she asked about it. So, we'll see. Someday we might have the technology to look out into space to see if there are any small planets around Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. We don't know that now because we simply don't have the technology.
Right.
But, there's no reason to believe that all planets are three-dimensional or in the first, second, and third dimension like our planet.
Right.
Many of the ETs say that they're from the fifth and sixth dimensions.
And scientists are just beginning to find out about more and more dimensions. I know that for a fact. And they're also connecting string theory to the dimensional idea, meaning that if an explosion happens here on Earth, it kind of vibrates a spider web, which connects to the different dimensions, which also vibrates them. So that would lend credibility to what you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's been given to a few people, that information. So I don't think that they're lying. I think that they have genuine concerns for themselves.
Well, activities seem to go, but UFO activity sightings, things like that really seem to increase a great deal in the nuclear age. I mean, as soon as we had nuclear vessels out there in the water, we had ET checking them out. And we've got multiple stories from sailors and high up officers in naval history telling us this.
Absolutely.
We even had Matthew Roberts from the USS Roosevelt on here on our channel probably about a month ago, and he was talking about how they had seen several ET vehicles coming in and out of the water. And that was a common occurrence.
Yes.
So I think there's also USOs also observing underwater nuclear subs.
We have records of them being tracked and things like that, and really being toyed with by something that's so much faster and more agile underwater than the nuclear sub itself that it's almost unbelievable. That's part of the actual report that was released, the classified version of the UAP report that was released recently, that unfortunately we have not gotten to see as people, but Tim and I are privy to certain information about that. And that's one of the things that they looked into because it's actually happened quite a bit underwater encounters.
Yes. And I have every reason to believe that they have underground bases or underwater bases. It makes sense. They won't be shot at when entering the atmosphere and leaving the atmosphere. If they're under the water, they're not bothering anybody. You know, if they're in deep bodies of water and they have bases under there, they can live there. And even down in Peru, I think it's Peru, I spoke to a professor down there who has been doing research on people who are actually able to do CE5 experiments to call in craft. The craft lifts up out of the water. When they're called in, they come, the humans who are present see the non-human entities in the craft, and they can communicate telepathically. So that's taking place in places where people are kind, you might say. That's what the professor told me. People are kinder and gentler, closer to, they might be shepherds. Those were the first ones that they went to. So that's the kind of person that they are attempting to, I guess, communicate with and give messages to.
We interviewed Preston Dennett last week, and he was mentioning the fact that ETs were interacting directly with people that were benefiting mankind, people that were working as a kind, gentler outreach for the world. And those are the people that were being benefited by the ET contact. And what it was directly relating to was medical intervention, healings done of people that have something wrong with them here on Earth, anywhere from an infection or a cut all the way up to cancer, being healed instantaneously by a beam of light or by a visitation. But these people have been selected based on their outreach to mankind. So that gives credibility to what you just said.
Yeah, and Betty and Barney, look at them. They were reaching out to mankind. They were advocates of human rights, of civil rights. They did very good things for people. And because I've worked with on social projects, commonality studies, primarily with over 5,000 experiencers. And for the past 30 years, I've been investigating all of this as well, pretty much on a full-time basis. And what I've discovered is that many people who were initially terrified of their contact experiences, over time have become accustomed to it and are able to communicate with these non-humans. And the non-humans will heal them if they have a physiological problem. This has happened many times. In fact, in one of my presentations, I show an orb, this experiencer that I was working with for a number of years had contacted me, and he had been diagnosed with lymphoma. I have a photograph of his neck. It's very, very large. And so I said to him, well, first, do you believe in a higher power? And he said, yes. I said, well, good, pray, and I'll pray for you. And then I said, people are being healed when they ask for healing from their ETs. So please start sending telepathic messages to those ETs several times every day to ask for healing. And so he started doing that. And a couple of weeks later, he sent me the video of this beautiful, it's like a white orb and with a blue halo around it. It comes into his bedroom, it slides down the wall, and then it just flies almost like a butterfly across the room. So pretty. With it, it ends up having a gold kind of center when I make it become still, and when I stop it. And then it hovers over his body. It puts down these beautiful iridescent tendrils, and dives down into his body. He then slept for about 12 hours. And when he woke up, the nodes in his neck were no longer visible. Well, he still did go in for the surgery, and they removed 4 tiny necrotic nodes that were not cancerous.
Wow.
It's incredible. In fact, Dr. Joseph Birx has his records, and I have some of his records as well. I was healed. I had chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome. In fact, I had to leave my professional career because of it. And because it is exhaustion at a cellular level. And you're not able to utilize the sugars in your body appropriately. And so it was about the year 2011, 2012, I was doing one of my studies, and an experiencer took part in the study. And he said, would you like to talk to my ETs? And so I said, sure, I'd love to. And so he lives in Australia. We did a Skype conversation, and I was able to talk to this little ET called Keek. And the experiencer's name is Paul Hamden. And so I was complaining to Keek that I hadn't felt well in many, many years. And I would really appreciate it if he could give me some help, because every time that I was going out and speaking at conferences, then I'd be ill with chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome. I said, it's really causing problems for me. And he just said, oh, another sick human. And then I didn't know if Paul was credible or not. I didn't know if I'd be healed or not. I wasn't anticipating that I would be. But 4 nights later, I woke up in my bed in a tremendous amount of pain. And it was deep, deep pain in certain organs in my body. In fact, I woke my husband up and said, you might have to call 911. I don't know what's going on here. And then the next thing I knew, I was in a different kind of environment, some kind of a matrix environment. I could kind of in my peripheral vision seemed tall entities, and they were glowing. And then I saw like a chart, in a sense, and I don't even know if this was a vision or if there was a chart in front of me or what, but I saw a body, like my body, I thought, and I could see that there was like energy running through the periphery of my body. And I could see my organs that were highlighted in one in green, one in pink. I talked to Joe Birx about that, and he said, those are the organs that are involved in chronic fatigue and immune dysfunction syndrome. And the next thing I knew, I was waking up and I felt like I was 23 again. I have not had a relapse since that time. And I'm just so grateful for that happened. And of course, it confirmed that Paul Hamden is who he says he is, and that there is an ET that he calls Keek who did this favor for me. So I'm very grateful.
Outstanding. Well, does anyone else have any other questions, gentlemen?
I think you covered it all pretty much fairly decently. In fact, I found out some things today that I didn't know. So I do express my deepest thanks to you, Kathleen.
My pleasure.
Yes, Kathleen, thank you very much for being here with us. Again, the story is, you're probably the closest person to one of probably the biggest UFO abduction story in history. And we're just very, very honored to have you here with us. Thank you for being part of it. Thank you for giving us your time.
And thank you so much. And it was nice to see you all. And Terry, again. So thank you, and you're welcome.
We hope to see you again sometime.
Okay.
And as always, we want to thank Terry Lovelace as well. Terry, you the man, you know it. Thank you for being here with us,
Oh,
sir.
I really appreciate the opportunity. This was
Thank you.
a wonderful opportunity. It's always wonderful to talk to Kathleen. Thank you.
Take care.
Fantastic. Powerful interview. Powerful. And Terry Lovelace, I saw some folks asking about who Terry Lovelace is. Terry Lovelace is actually an experiencer himself. He was is also a part of a very famous abduction story. In fact, he's written a couple of books on it, Incident Devil's Den being one of them. I suggest you really go check that out. It's just a wonderful story. He tells it so well in such vivid detail. And again, the guy is he couldn't be better to work with. He's one of our favorite people. He really is.
Right, and he actually has photographs of alien implants that are in his body still to this day. So check it out and read his story and find out why those implants were not removed. There is a mystery to it.
Absolutely. So anyway, great interview, very in depth. We're very fortunate to get an interview with Kathleen. She's a very busy lady in ufology. In fact, she's at a conference this weekend in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. I think she said she was going to, something like that. And so we're very fortunate to have.
You're muted, Tommy.
Sorry, having technical difficulties with that. Now, folks, we've got something very special for you. Tim has compiled a really, really class A UFO video review for this week, and we're going to go ahead and go for that. And we'll talk about that, folks. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, go ahead and light that chat up for us.
Okay, here we go. Okay, this is a drawing drawn by GameVet02 of a video that he and his wife saw. And this is a video they found that represents what they saw. Now here's the sketch again, very detailed. They saw it outside a thunderstorm. GamePet02 is a regular visitor to our chat room. He is also a trucker, so he's always got eyes in the sky, right, Tommy?
We love truckers. We love them. Truckers and law enforcement. They've always got cameras going, and they're always out there basically looking around at night.
Right. Okay, here's a UFO that's over Jackhead, Manitoba on 5/9/2021. Take a look at this.
Look at that, Gore, look. It's a fucking line. Shh. Shh. What the fuck is that?
It is, Mama.
It almost looks like a cylinder, almost too long for a Tic Tac. Or it could be even a disc. It's got an energy field around it.
Definitely something of substance there. Wow. That's just something you don't see every day.
Here's UFOs passing by a Qatar jet on 8/29/2021. The first one's really hard to see, but the second one's big. It flies right by it. And I think it's in the foreground rather than right next to the jet, but the one up above may be near the jet. But the bigger one, I think, is in the foreground.
I agree with you. There's no way that that's something flying past the lens like a bug or something. There's no way. That is definitely, look at that. That's definitely far past that jet.
And I slowed it down here so you can see it, but I'll speed it up to normal speed so you can actually get an idea of how fast it's passing this jet.
Well, if you've noticed, we've been getting a lot of footage from people that are on jets lately, passenger jets.
Right. We are. Here it goes.
Yeah, that's.
You consider how fast that jet's flying.
Oh,
and
it just blowing it away speed wise. It's amazing.
yes.
Is
There's a UFO over Hertfordshire, United Kingdom.
in the middle of the field and keeps turning around.
That's very recent footage too.
The black thing on
Yep.
the front is now coming towards me.
This is the raw footage before I changed the color to enhance it.
Went down to the trees and then went really
Does look tic-tacish, doesn't it, Renee?
A little bit.
now it's going out towards
But sometimes it even looks like a triangle. When you see it up close, it looks like a
It's
wedge.
looking down again now.
You'll see it.
It's turned around because the car's gone down the hill.
I'll make it large.
Oh, now it's starting to.
Kind of like the ones that
Now it's looking at that car.
were seen by Mount Rainier.
It's gone past. It's turning itself. Oh,
See, right there.
Yeah.
There's a
looks like
car's
a
just gone
wedge.
past again.
I mean, if you look at the back end of that, like that right there, didn't that kind of remind you of what what was the guy, the very first flying saucer sighting? What was his name, Tim?
Sorry, hold on a second here. What's that now? Mantell, wasn't it?
The very
No, it was the guy that flew past Mount Rainier.
yeah, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but if you think about his description, that sort of fits it.
Yeah, I gotta find that video again. Sorry about that. Here we go. Well, we're gonna watch a couple seconds of this again. This is it flying
Now it's
by.
going out towards.
Right here it looks
Looking
triangular.
down again now.
Kenneth Arnold.
Kenneth
Yes,
Arnold,
Renee.
thank you.
You're
Thank you,
correct.
Renee.
Oh, now it's starting to. Oh, where is it? There it is. Now
Hey,
it's looking
Survivor
at that
Girl.
car.
Glad to see you.
It's gone past.
Mixed breed
Turning itself.
Mixed Breed Entertainment. Glad you made it.
Oh, speed it
There,
up.
right there. It looks
Yeah.
like a
There's a
wedge.
car that's
Yeah,
just gone past
Sure
there.
does. Like the back end of it's concaved or something.
Right, exactly. Right
Interesting.
there.
Interesting. Yeah.
And you can see it up close twice. Yeah, I'll play it twice.
Huh. Out of the norm, out of the normal things that we see for sure. My goodness.
Right. Now I'll tell you where this is in a second. You can see the moon and the huge amount of lights above it. It's over Sao Paulo, Brazil, and it seems to be a really prolific site for UFO sightings.
Yep.
What do you think of this one, Tommy?
Wow. It does appear to be one large object that whatever it is, it appears to be huge. Again, it's one of those things I'd like to see what's in the background in the daytime, but I mean, that's
Right.
definitely, different.
Hi, Kenneth. Nice to see you. The witnesses said it was about a football field in length.
I'll bet. Huge.
Eu tô encucado até agora.
Here's a
com esse
UFO in
negócio
daylight
parado
over Brazil Beach.
na praia. Ele estava encostado na água e agora ele está em cima, parado. Um vento absurdo e o negócio não se mexe.
Certainly doesn't look like a drone.
Right.
What is that?
I don't know. Somebody
Ele tava
suggested
encostado
a
na
balloon, but it's staying
E agora
steady
ele tá em
against a
cima,
really powerful wind.
parado.
So I don't believe it's a
Um
balloon.
vento absurdo e o negócio não se mexe.
Like a big black jelly bean out there.
Yeah. Reflecting the sunlight too.
Yeah. Definitely different.
Renee says it's Mork from Orc.
It might be. Yeah, that's, I mean, it's, I don't think that's a balloon. It's definitely not a drone.
Sherry says very cool.
Ele estava encostado na água e agora ele tá
Renee
em
found an
cima,
egg.
parado. Um vento absurdo e o negócio não se mexe. Paradinho.
Put it in a definite maybe pile for sure. Oh, I love this one.
These are strange lunar lights flashing around the outside of a couple different craters. Take a look at these. Now I will zoom in to where you can see them real close.
You see, I'm not going for water crystals or something, some lame excuse that the government would no doubt cough up about something like this. Even if it were water deposit or water crystals or ice or something like that, then you might get a flash once. But look at this; these continue to flash. There's more to it here. A lot more to it.
Yeah, it's almost like they're beacons or some type of
Something.
code.
Yeah.
A lot of people suggested in the comments that it was being Morse code was being used. Well, if that's the case, then we have bases on the moon. That would justify the fact that we do have bases there. Or maybe extraterrestrial Morse code. Yes, Lucas, that's an idea.
I don't know why we'd be using Morse code off planet. This is there's something emitting light on the moon right there, folks. I mean, I don't know how else you say it. And this isn't like this is a repeat loop or whatever. I mean, look at the moon. Watch it move as we pass across the moon's surface. Watch these. They're almost like they're in unison in a way.
Right. In my opinion, it's something intelligent. It is not like a reflection of gas, which is another theory that has been put out there by scientists. Because if it was a reflection of some type of gas escaping from the moon, you'd see it more often.
What kind of gas would reflect light like that? And I guess it lends to be the bigger question. I mean, I'm not going for that one. There's no way. That's something emitting light on the moon, and it's artificial light. And then, like Tim's point, if there were jetties popping up all over the moon, gases and stuff, we'd have known that a long time ago. That doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, Fred said they left mirrors on the moon, and I believe if you can aim a laser and hit the mirror, it will reflect. But the problem is, even if you hit the mirrors, there's no sign of a laser going up to the moon. You can see a laser beam.
And reflect the light to where? It just happens to be reflecting in a manner that we can see it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I can get there on that one.
And plus, when you zoom in, you can see the size of these reflections. It isn't just from a small laser.
Mm-hmm. Look at that, over and over and over again.
Right, and sometimes really quickly
Yeah.
too.
Huh. That is amazing.
Now I'll
Look,
zoom back in. So
we've seen a lot of other videos where weird things were flying across the moon's surface. And I mean, it's not like it's an unheard of thing. There are channels out there dedicated to doing nothing but basically watching the moon. And some of the things that they come up with are just absolutely flat out amazing. It's like, what the hell is going on up there?
And this is definitely one of them.
Mm-hmm.
But we still say, what are they? Now, this is a UFO over Brazil, but what I want to say about this one, there is no frame of reference.
Olha lá, redondinho. Interessante é que não dá pra ver ele redondo daqui, né? Para pouquinho. Parar o quê? De filmar?
Now I will stabilize it.
A bateria tá acabando. Ele tá descendo, olha lá, redondinho.
That's why we always say, folks, if you do get lucky enough to capture something, make sure that you put something else in the background from time to time, like a telephone pole, a tree, a building, something like that, to give us a little bit more, a better idea of the actual size of the object.
Yeah, like the ground or the buildings in the background.
Mm-hmm. Something to give it more context, size-wise. I don't know what that is, but it doesn't look natural to me.
I made it blue so we could see the lights better.
Olha lá, redondinho. Interessante é que não dá pra ver ele redondo daqui, né? Para pouquinho. Parar o quê? De filmar?
Renee says it's the Turkey UFO Part 2.
Ele tá descendo, olha lá, redondinho.
Very well could be. Don't know. Bob Gray says it could be a fuel truck.
Caraca, é muito redondo.
I just really don't know. There's just not enough there to give us a...
Right, this one has no frame of reference, so it's really difficult to discern what it is or how big it is. Now, this is over Reno, Nevada. You can see it right over the roof.
Wow.
I got the opinion that this wasn't necessarily UFOs, one UFO. It was several objects exiting a portal. It almost looks like they're leaving some type of portal because they go back to where they started and then they're gone.
That is so wild. Huh.
Watch this. See on the right, that big one breaks up and you get a bunch just streaming out. Now, I've had friends that have reported that they have gone out in the field in Nevada and actually seen portals where objects have come in and out of the portal. So this could very likely be one of those cases. Oh, yeah, Renee says plasma. Yeah, that's possible.
I just can't imagine that being ball lightning or anything like that. It's moving in two different directions. I mean, that's wow.
Yeah, it's not ball lightning.
That's disturbing.
Check that out. There's a still.
Weird looking purple light to it too.
Here's a replay of the original raw footage, but I enhanced it a little so you could see it clearer.
Foo Fighters, yeah. That could very well be. That is amazing. It's not often that I'm floored, but I'm floored right now.
Yeah, that's a really good clip.
That's not over water. What is that area?
This is a clip over Calumet City, Indiana. Tommy, quit looking at the girl.
How'd you know?
She's looking at a large cylinder vehicle or disc above the tree line. Yeah, Zopa, she couldn't get over there because there was a cow fence and they couldn't get access to the property. So,
Looks like it may be a ways off too, for that matter.
yeah, really far way off. She thought it might be over Lake Michigan because it was Calumet City is pretty close to Lake Michigan.
Yeah,
But
we all know they love water.
But it's not. It's over the trees, far off beyond the trees that you could see there. But it is over trees. Yeah.
Stationary, not moving one bit, not making any noise at all. I mean, come on.
Renee says Imperial Star Destroyer, and there she is looking at it. Okay. Thank you very much for watching our UFO video review. That's it for the week of 9/18/2021. We will work on more for next time. Hope you join us for that. Tommy, any last comments?
Just want to thank everybody for coming out as always. Had a really great in-depth interview with Kathleen. That's just something, again, we were very privileged to have. I have passed her link out there for her book and all of her information, so folks feel free to hit that. The other thing is, don't forget that we do have a Patreon page now. If you'd like to go over there and help us out, we really would appreciate it. A few pennies a month would really help us out a great deal. Other than that, again, we're just looking forward to next week, and we're just going to keep on trucking. Who knows who we're going to have as a guest next?
Right. And I want to thank everybody who came tonight in the chat. We had a few new people. Lisa Savoy, who is possibly going to be an interviewee on our channel in the future. She has a new book coming out. I can't say what it's called, but Lisa, we're going to look forward to possibly having that interview. Zolfa, Paranormal World Investigators, Renee, Julia White, Bob Gray, everybody who was here this evening, thank you for joining us. And Tommy, you want to lead us out with an outro of some kind, a statement?
Right. Just everybody, thanks again. We had more clips this week, but we thought with the interview that was running as long as it did and everything, that we'd kind of have to make a more concise version of the UFO review of the week. But we have plenty more material for you. You don't have to worry about that. And we will see you next week.
Yes. And thanks to everybody in the chat and everybody who watched live online. Thank you very much and good night.